The conference room on the 42nd floor of Sterling Enterprises buzzed with anticipation as directors from 3 continents waited for the final signature that would seal the biggest merger in the company's history. Marcus Sterling stood at the head of the mahogany table, his tailored charcoal suit fitting perfectly across his broad shoulders, every inch the self-made billionaire who had built an empire from a single construction contract 12 years ago. At 38, he had everything he'd ever dreamed of, except the one thing he'd taken for granted until it was too late. His phone vibrated for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. He glanced down briefly, seeing Diane's name flash across the screen, and pressed the side button to silence it. Not now. This deal represented 18 months of negotiations, countless trips across the Atlantic, and the culmination of everything he'd worked toward since founding Sterling Enterprises. His wife would understand. She always did. Diane Sterling sat in the back of the taxi, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. The cramping had started an hour ago, subtle at first, but now it felt like her entire body was betraying her. At 7 months pregnant with twins, she knew something was terribly wrong. The doctor's warnings from her last appointment echoed in her mind. Bed rest, reduced stress, careful monitoring. But Marcus had been so consumed with the merger lately, working 18-hour days, sleeping at the office more often than not. She tried his number again, her breath coming in short gasps as another wave of pain rolled through her abdomen. The cab driver's worried eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am, should I take you straight to the hospital?" "Please," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Call my husband one more time first." In the conference room, Marcus finally turned his phone face down on the table, giving his full attention to the lawyers presenting the final contract details. Richard Pemberton, the silver-haired CEO of the company they were acquiring, raised his glass of scotch in a preliminary toast. "To new beginnings, Marcus. Your father would be proud." The mention of his father sent an unexpected pang through Marcus's chest. James Sterling had died of a heart attack 15 years ago, collapsing on a construction site at age 55, having worked himself to exhaustion providing for his family. Marcus had vowed to honor that sacrifice by becoming everything his father never had the chance to be: wealthy, powerful, untouchable by the financial struggles that had plagued their family. But his father had also been present. James Sterling never missed a single school play, baseball game, or family dinner, no matter how exhausted he was. Marcus couldn't remember the last time he'd sat down for a proper meal with Diane. They'd met 6 years ago at a charity gala. She'd been volunteering, coordinating the silent auction, with an efficiency and grace that caught his attention immediately. Diane Crawford, a social worker with kind eyes and a laugh that made him forget about quarterly earnings and stock portfolios. She'd refused his first 3 invitations to dinner, insisting she didn't date men who thought money could buy everything. He'd had to win her the old-fashioned way, with persistence, honesty, and finally, vulnerability. Their wedding had been simple, despite Marcus's wealth. Diane had insisted on a small ceremony in her hometown of Riverside, surrounded by family and the friends who actually knew them, not the business associates and socialites who populated Marcus's usual circles. For 2 glorious weeks during their honeymoon in coastal Maine, he turned off his phone and remembered what it felt like to be just a man in love, not a CEO with shareholders to appease. When had that changed? When had he stopped being the man who would drop everything to bring her favorite coffee when she was studying for her social work licensure exams? The merger, he told himself. Once this was done, he'd make it up to her. They'd take a proper baby moon, maybe rent that cottage in Vermont she'd been mentioning. He'd be present for the twins' arrival, be the father his own dad had been. His phone lit up again. This time, it was a text from Diane's best friend, Jennifer. "Marcus, please pick up. Diane needs you." A flicker of unease passed through him, but Pemberton was speaking directly to him now, asking about the transition timeline for key personnel. This was the critical moment, the point where everything could still fall apart if he seemed distracted or uncertain. He typed a quick response to Jennifer. "In crucial meeting. Will call in 30 minutes." At Mercy General Hospital, Diane was rushed through the emergency entrance, the automatic doors seeming to move in slow motion. A nurse helped her onto a gurney while another took her vitals, their expressions shifting from professional calm to barely concealed alarm. "Doctor." Patricia Morrison, the obstetrician who'd been monitoring Diane's high-risk pregnancy, appeared within minutes, her face grave. "Diane, I need you to stay calm for me. Dr. Morrison said, though her hands moved with urgent efficiency. "We're going to do everything we can." "My babies," Diane gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Please, my babies. And Marcus, someone needs to tell Marcus." Jennifer burst through the doors, her hair disheveled from running. She'd been at her cafe 3 blocks away when Diane's frantic call came through. "I'm here, sweetie. I'm right here." She grabbed her friend's hand, then looked at the doctor with desperate eyes. "What's happening?" "Placental abruption," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "We need to do an emergency cesarean section immediately. The babies are in distress." Back at Sterling Enterprises, Marcus finally lifted his pen to sign the contract. The room erupted in applause and handshakes. Champagne appeared as if by magic, poured by assistants who'd been waiting for this moment. Pemberton clapped him on the shoulder, already talking about the press conference they'd need to schedule, the statements to prepare for the financial news networks. Marcus felt his phone buzzing insistently in his pocket, a continuous vibration that indicated an incoming call. He ignored it, accepting a glass of champagne and forcing a smile for the company photographer. This was his moment. The defining achievement of his career. Diane would understand. She always understood that his work, his success, was all for their family, for their future, for the twins who would never know financial struggle the way he had. He had no idea that at that exact moment, 37 blocks away, his wife was being wheeled into an operating room, fighting for her life and the lives of their unborn children, whispering his name between prayers. The surgery lasted 2 hours and 43 minutes. Jennifer sat in the waiting room, her phone pressed to her ear as she left her 7th voicemail for Marcus. "Marcus, I don't know if you're getting these messages, but Diane is in surgery. It's an emergency C-section. The babies—" Her voice cracked. "Just please call me back or get to Mercy General immediately." She hung up and stared at the sterile white walls, remembering the day Diane had told her about the pregnancy. They'd been at Jennifer's cafe, the morning sun streaming through the windows, and Diane had been radiant with joy despite her nervous fidgeting. "Twins, Jen. Can you believe it? Marcus doesn't know yet. He's been so stressed about this merger. I'm going to tell him tonight with his favorite dinner and maybe a silly onesie or two." That had been 7 months ago. The merger that was supposed to take 6 months had stretched on and on, consuming Marcus entirely. Jennifer had watched her best friend's joy slowly transform into lonely determination as she attended doctor's appointments alone, set up the nursery with Jennifer's help instead of her husband's, and made excuses for Marcus's absence at family gatherings. "Mrs. Sterling is asking for her husband," a nurse said, approaching Jennifer cautiously. "Is he on his way?" Jennifer felt anger surge through her chest. "I've been trying to reach him for hours. He's in some meeting." The nurse's expression remained neutral, but Jennifer saw the judgment flicker in her eyes. She'd probably seen this before. Important men, too busy for the most important moments. "The babies are in the NICU. They're very premature at 32 weeks, but they're fighters. Dr. Morrison will want to speak with both parents as soon as possible." At Sterling Enterprises, the celebration had moved to Marcus's private office, where Pemberton and the keyboard members continued discussing integration strategies. Marcus's assistant, Trevor, a dedicated 26-year-old who'd been with the company for 3 years, knocked hesitantly on the door. "Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there have been multiple urgent calls from Mercy General Hospital and a Jennifer Cho. I think something might be wrong with Mrs. Sterling." The room fell silent. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. "What kind of calls?" "The hospital called 4 times in the last hour. Ms. Cho has called 17 times and sent numerous texts." Trevor's face was pale. "Sir, I think you need to check your phone." Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands. 23 missed calls, 15 text messages. The most recent voicemail was from a number he didn't recognize. "Mr. Sterling, this is Mercy General Hospital. Your wife, Diane Sterling, is currently in surgery. We need you to come to the hospital immediately. It's an emergency situation involving both her and your babies." The champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. "My God. When was that call?" "An hour and 47 minutes ago, sir." Marcus was already moving toward the door, his face ashen. Pemberton stood up, concerned. "Marcus, what's happened?" "My wife, the babies. I have to go." He grabbed his coat. his hands fumbling with his car keys. Trevor gently took them from him. "Sir, you shouldn't drive. I'll take you. It's faster if I drive." The drive to Mercy General was a blur of red lights, and Trevor's calm voice trying to keep Marcus grounded. Marcus stared at his phone, reading through Jennifer's increasingly desperate messages, each one a dagger to his heart. "She called me, Trevor, during the meeting. She called 3 times, and I silenced my phone." His voice broke. "What kind of husband does that? Mr. Sterling, you didn't know. I should have known. I should have answered. What if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The possibilities were too horrific to contemplate. They arrived at the hospital, and Marcus practically fell out of the car before it fully stopped. He ran through the emergency entrance, his expensive shoes slipping on the polished floor. "Diane Sterling. My wife, Diane Sterling. Where is she?" The receptionist checked her computer with maddening slowness. "3rd floor surgical recovery. But sir, visiting hours—" He was already at the elevator, punching the button repeatedly. When the doors finally opened, Jennifer was standing there, her eyes red from crying. She looked at him with an expression that contained equal parts relief and fury. "Where the hell were you?" she said, her voice trembling. "Jennifer, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Are they—" "She's alive." "The babies are alive." "Barely." Jennifer stepped out of the elevator, blocking his path. "Do you know what the doctor said? Another 20 minutes, and we would have lost all 3 of them. 20 minutes, Marcus." The words hit him like physical blows. 20 minutes. While he'd been signing contracts and accepting congratulations, his wife and children had been dying. "I need to see her. She's sedated. They had to give her a lot of medication during the surgery. There were complications. She lost a significant amount of blood." Jennifer's voice softened slightly at the broken expression on his face. "The twins are in the NICU, 2 boys, 3 pounds each. They're on ventilators." Marcus felt his knees weaken. Sons. He had sons, and he hadn't been there. Dr. Morrison appeared from around the corner, still in her surgical scrubs. "Mr. Sterling, I'm glad you're here. We need to discuss your wife's condition and the status of your children." They walked to a small consultation room. Marcus sat down heavily, feeling like he was moving through a nightmare. Dr. Morrison's expression was grave as she pulled up Diane's chart on a tablet. "Your wife experienced a complete placental abruption. It's a serious complication where the placenta separates from the uterine wall. In Diane's case, it was likely triggered by the stress she's been under, combined with her already high-risk pregnancy status." The doctor's tone was professional, but Marcus detected a hint of accusation. "She coded twice during surgery. We were able to resuscitate her, but she's not out of danger yet. The next 48 hours are critical." Marcus couldn't breathe. Coded. Died. Diane had died twice. "The babies?" he managed to ask. "They're extremely premature. Baby A, we need you to name them by the way, has respiratory distress syndrome and a heart murmur. Baby B has similar breathing issues and possible bleeding in the brain. We won't know the full extent of any complications for several days. They'll need to stay in the NICU for at least 8 weeks, possibly longer. Can I see them? Can I see my wife?" Dr. Morrison stood. "Follow me. But Mr. Sterling, I need you to understand something. Your wife fought incredibly hard to stay conscious long enough to make sure we could save your sons. The last thing she said before we put her under was your name. She needed you and you weren't there. I've been doing this for 23 years, and I can tell you that support from family, especially from a spouse, can make the difference between recovery and giving up." The weight of her words crushed him as they walked down the corridor toward Diane's room. Through the window, he could see her lying motionless in the bed, surrounded by monitors and IV lines. She looked so small, so fragile. Nothing like the vibrant woman who'd kissed him goodbye 3 days ago when he'd left for yet another late night at the office. "She asked for you 17 times before the surgery," Jennifer said quietly from behind him. "Even when she could barely speak from the pain, she kept asking if you'd called back." Marcus pressed his hand against the glass, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. He'd spent 12 years building an empire, proving he wasn't the poor kid from the wrong side of town anymore, making sure his family would never struggle the way his parents had. And in the process, he'd failed at the only thing that truly mattered. He'd failed to be there when his family needed him most. Marcus sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside Diane's bed, holding her hand as if his grip alone could anchor her to life. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, punctuated occasionally by the whoosh of the ventilator that had been necessary for the first 12 hours post-surgery. They'd removed it that morning, and now she breathed on her own. Though each breath seemed labored, painful, it had been 36 hours since the surgery. 36 hours of hell where Marcus had lived in a perpetual state of terror, watching his wife hover between consciousness and oblivion, praying to a God he'd barely thought about in years. He hadn't left the hospital. Trevor had brought him a change of clothes and his laptop, though the computer remained unopened in the corner. Pemberton had called twice expressing concern and assuring him the merger details could wait. Marcus had barely registered the conversations. Nothing mattered except the woman in this bed and the two tiny boys fighting for life 3 floors above them. Jennifer had finally gone home to shower and sleep, making Marcus promise to call if there was any change. Before leaving, she'd squeezed his shoulder. "She loves you, you know, even after everything. But Marcus, if she pulls through this, when she pulls through this, you need to decide what kind of man you're going to be." He knew what she meant. The old Marcus, the one who'd silenced his wife's desperate calls for a business deal, couldn't exist anymore. That man had nearly cost him everything. Diane's eyelids fluttered. Marcus leaned forward instantly, his heart racing. "Diane? Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually finding his face. For a long moment she just stared at him, and Marcus saw something in her expression that terrified him more than anything else in the past 2 days. A distance, a coldness that had never been there before. "The babies," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube. "They're alive, they're fighters, just like their mother. 2 boys, Diane. We have 2 beautiful sons." A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I called you." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 accusations. Marcus felt his throat close up. "I know. God, Diane, I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." "I was scared," she continued, her voice barely audible. "I knew something was wrong, and all I wanted was to hear your voice, to have you tell me everything would be okay. I should have been there. I should have answered. There's no excuse. You chose a meeting over me." Her eyes, usually so warm and forgiving, were devastatingly empty. "Over our children. I was dying, Marcus, and you chose a contract. The truth of it was unbearable. I didn't know you were dying. You thought I could wait. Like I always wait." Diane turned her head away from him, staring at the wall. "How many appointments have you missed? How many nights did I eat dinner alone? I told myself it was temporary, that once the merger was done, you'd come back to me. But the truth is, you were never really there, were you?" Marcus stood abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "That's not fair. Everything I did was for us, for our family." "No." Diane's voice was stronger now, edged with an anger he'd never heard from her before. "Everything you did was for you, to prove something to yourself, to your dead father, to everyone who ever doubted you. But not for me, Marcus, because if it was for me, you would have been there when I begged you to come home early because I was feeling unwell. You would have been at the ultrasound when they told us the twins were in a concerning position. You would have answered your damn phone when your pregnant wife called you 3 times in 10 minutes. The machines beeped faster as her heart rate elevated. A nurse rushed in, checking the monitors with concern. "Mrs. Sterling, you need to stay calm." "Your blood pressure." "I want him to leave," Diane said flatly. "I can't look at him right now." The nurse glanced between them uncomfortably. Marcus felt his world crumbling. "Diane, please, Mr. Sterling, perhaps it's best if you step out for a bit," the nurse said gently. "Give your wife some time to rest." Marcus left the room in a daze, Jennifer's earlier words echoing in his mind. "When she pulls through this, you need to decide what kind of man you're going to be." He headed to the NICU, the one place where he felt he could still do something useful, even if it was just being present. The neonatal intensive care unit was a world of hushed voices and gentle movements. Babies smaller than some dolls lay in plastic incubators, fighting battles that seemed impossibly large for such tiny bodies. Marcus scrubbed his hands thoroughly before entering, following the protocol the nurses had taught him. His sons lay side by side in their incubators, connected to various tubes and wires. Baby A, whom Marcus had named Daniel after his father, was slightly larger, more active. Baby B, James, named for Diane's grandfather, was quieter, more fragile. The nurse, a kind woman named Ruth, who'd been working in the NICU for 15 years, smiled at him. "You can touch them through the ports," she encouraged. "Skin contact is important, even in small doses. They know their father's touch." Marcus carefully slid his hands through the openings, gently placing his fingers on Daniel's tiny chest, then James's. They were so small, so impossibly delicate. How could something this small survive? How could they possibly be strong enough to overcome all the obstacles ahead? "Talk to them," Ruth said softly. "They can hear you." Marcus's voice cracked as he spoke. "Hey, little guys, I'm your dad. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you were born. I'm sorry I let your mum down when she needed me most." Tears fell freely now, dropping onto his shirt. "But I'm here now, and I promise you, I swear to you, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be the father you deserve." Over the next week, Marcus maintained a vigil between Diane's room and the NICU. Diane refused to see him for the first 3 days, but on the 4th day, when Dr. Morrison cleared her to visit the babies, she allowed Marcus to wheel her up to the NICU in a wheelchair. The moment she saw her sons, Diane broke down completely. Marcus stood back, giving her space, watching as she carefully touched each tiny hand through the incubator ports. "They're so small," she whispered. "So perfect. And so small." "They're going to make it," Marcus said quietly. "The doctors say they're showing improvement every day." Diane looked at him then, really looked at him, and seemed to notice for the first time the dark circles under his eyes, the wrinkled clothes, the desperate exhaustion written across his face. "Have you been here the entire time?" "I'm not leaving. Not you, not them, not ever again." Something shifted in her expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the smallest crack in the wall she'd built between them. "Marcus, we need to talk, really talk, about everything." They returned to her room, and for the first time in years they had an honest conversation. Diane told him how lonely she'd been, how invisible she'd felt as he poured every ounce of himself into Sterling Enterprises, how she'd started to wonder if she'd made a mistake marrying him, if the man she'd fallen in love with had been an illusion. Marcus listened, really listened, without defending himself or making excuses. And then he told her something he'd never admitted to anyone, not even himself. "I was terrified of becoming my father. He worked himself to death trying to provide for us, and I watched my mother cry herself to sleep after his funeral because we couldn't afford a proper burial. I promised myself I'd never put my family in that position, but somewhere along the way, I forgot that being present matters more than being wealthy. I became exactly what I feared, a man who sacrificed his family for his work, just in a different way." "Your father was there for every important moment," Diane said softly. "You told me that yourself. He may not have been rich, but he was present. That's what made him a good father." Marcus nodded, the truth of it finally sinking in. "I've been chasing the wrong legacy." "So what are you going to do about it?" It was then that Marcus made the decision that would change everything. "I'm selling my majority stake in Sterling Enterprises." Diane's eyes widened. "Marcus, you can't. That's your life's work." "No," he said firmly. "You're my life's work. Daniel and James are my life's work. The company is just money and buildings and contracts. It's not worth losing you." The board meeting at Sterling Enterprises 3 weeks later was unlike any Marcus had ever conducted. He sat at the head of the table, the same spot where he'd ignored his wife's calls. But he was a different man now. Pemberton and the other board members looked at him with a mixture of concern and confusion as he laid out his proposal. "I'm selling 60% of my shares in Sterling Enterprises," Marcus announced. "I'll retain 20% as a silent investor, but I'm stepping down as CEO effective immediately. Trevor Hammond will assume the role of interim CEO until you appoint a permanent replacement." The room erupted. Pemberton stood, his face flushed. "Marcus, you can't be serious. You built this company from nothing. This merger, everything we've worked for. The merger is complete. The company is in excellent shape. Trevor is more than capable, and frankly, he cares about Sterling Enterprises more than I do right now." Marcus's voice was calm, resolved. "My priorities have changed." "Because of what happened with your wife?" one of the directors asked carefully. "Marcus, we understand you've been under tremendous stress, but perhaps you should take some time before making such a drastic decision." "I've had 3 weeks to think about nothing else," Marcus interrupted. 3 weeks of watching my sons fight to breathe, watching my wife recover from nearly dying because I wasn't there when she needed me. This isn't a rash decision made in grief. This is the clearest decision I've ever made. Trevor, who'd been sitting quietly at the side of the room, spoke up. Mr. Sterling, are you sure about this? I'm honored, but you've been running this company alongside me for 3 years, Trevor. You know every aspect of the business, and more importantly, you have the hunger for it that I've lost. Sterling Enterprises needs someone who will give it everything. That's not me anymore. After the meeting, as Marcus packed up his personal items from his office, Pemberton came in alone. The older man poured 2 glasses of scotch and handed one to Marcus. Your father would be proud of you, you know. Marcus looked up, surprised. For walking away from everything I built? For knowing when to walk away. For understanding what truly matters. Pemberton sat down heavily. I have 3 ex-wives and 4 children who barely speak to me. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, and a penthouse that echoes with emptiness. You're making the choice I never had the courage to make. The 2 men sat in silence for a moment, drinking their scotch. Finally, Pemberton asked, "What will you do?" "I'm going to be a father, a husband. I'm going to figure out who Marcus Sterling is when he's not trying to prove something to the world." Marcus smiled slightly. Diane mentioned once that she'd always dreamed of opening a community center in her old neighborhood in Riverside, a place where families could get counseling, job training, childcare support, real help, not just handouts. I think I'd like to help her build that. 6 weeks later, Daniel and James came home from the hospital. They were still tiny, still required careful monitoring, but they were healthy enough to leave the NICU. Marcus had transformed one of the guest rooms into a nursery with Diane's input, soft blues and greens, none of the expensive designer items he would have insisted on before. Instead, it was warm and practical, filled with second-hand furniture Jennifer had helped them find and paint. The first night home was terrifying. Every sound the babies made sent Marcus into a panic. Was that breathing normal? Should James be sleeping this much? Was Daniel eating enough? Diane, still recovering herself, watched her husband fumble with diapers and struggled to position the babies for feeding with something like amazement. "You're actually here," she said softly as Marcus carefully burped Daniel at 3 in the morning. "You're really, truly here. Where else would I be?" Marcus adjusted Daniel against his shoulder, marveling at how the baby had already grown, how much stronger he felt than those first terrifying days. "6 months ago, you would have hired a night nurse. You would have kissed me goodnight and slept in the guest room so you could be fresh for morning meetings." Marcus was quiet for a moment, acknowledging the truth of it. 6 months ago, I was an idiot who thought success was measured in dollars and deals. I almost lost everything that mattered because I was chasing things that didn't. Diane stood, wrapping her arms around Marcus from behind, careful not to disturb Daniel. "I'm still angry with you sometimes. When I wake up at night, I remember lying in that taxi, terrified and alone, calling you and getting nothing. That doesn't just go away. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it, if you'll let me." "I'm letting you," she whispered. "But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I don't need the penthouse or the cars or the expensive vacations. I need you, present, engaged, choosing us every single day." "That's exactly what I'm going to do." 3 months later, Marcus stood in an empty warehouse in Riverside. Diane beside him, both of them wearing hard hats and looking at architectural plans spread across a makeshift table. The Crawford Family Resource Center, named after Diane's maiden name, was beginning to take shape. Marcus had invested a significant portion of the money from selling his Sterling shares into the project, but more importantly, he'd invested his time. He'd reconnected with some of his father's old construction crew, men who remembered the young Marcus who used to work summer jobs hauling materials and learning the trade. They'd agreed to help build the center, teaching Marcus the hands-on skills his corporate career had made him forget. "Your dad would love this," one of the older workers, a man named Frank who'd worked with James Sterling for 20 years, told Marcus. "He always said you had good hands for building. You just forgot it when you started wearing fancy suits." Marcus laughed, looking down at his work boots and dusty jeans. "Yeah, well, the fancy suits almost cost me everything. I think I prefer this." Jennifer visited often, bringing coffee and sandwiches from her cafe and playing with the twins while Marcus and Diane worked on center plans. One afternoon, as they sat in what would eventually be the counseling wing, Jennifer raised her cup in a toast. To second chances. To choosing what matters, Diane added. Marcus looked at his wife, really looked at her, the woman who'd forgiven him when he didn't deserve it, who'd survived the unsurvivable, who was building something meaningful with him instead of just accepting his guilt-driven gestures. To being present. The Crawford Family Resource Center opened on a bright Saturday morning 1 year after the twins' birth. Daniel and James, now chubby and healthy 1-year-olds, were the stars of the ceremony, charming everyone who met them. The center offered free counseling services, job training programs, a childcare co-op and support groups for families in crisis. During his speech at the opening, Marcus told the truth. A year and a half ago, I thought success meant building the biggest company, closing the biggest deal, having the biggest bank account. I was so focused on that definition of success that I almost destroyed the only things that actually mattered: my wife, my children, my humanity. I missed the most important call of my life because I thought a business meeting was more important than the woman I loved. He paused, looking at Diane, who stood at the side of the small stage with Daniel in her arms while Jennifer held James. My wife nearly died because I wasn't there. My sons came into this world fighting for every breath while I was congratulating myself on a merger. I will carry that regret for the rest of my life. But I'm grateful, incredibly grateful, that I got a second chance to get it right. After the ceremony, as the sun set over Riverside and families explored the new center, Marcus sat on the front steps with Diane. The twins were napping in their stroller, exhausted from all the attention. Marcus took Diane's hand, intertwining their fingers. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up Sterling Enterprises? The power? The prestige?" Marcus thought about it honestly. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. If the company would have grown even bigger. If I would have made even more money." He squeezed her hand. "But then I look at Daniel trying to walk, or James laughing at absolutely nothing, or you humming while you work on intake forms for the center, and I know I made the right choice. I didn't give up anything, Diane. I traded an empty empire for a real life." "What would you tell that man from 18 months ago?" Diane asked. The one sitting in that conference room silencing his phone? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the community they were building together, feeling the weight of his son's hand gripping his finger in sleep. "I'd tell him that the most important call you'll ever receive isn't from a business partner or a board member. It's from the person who loves you, reaching out in their darkest moment, trusting that you'll be there. And if you're lucky enough to get a second chance after missing that call, don't waste it proving you've changed. Just change, show up, be present, choose love over legacy every single time." Diane leaned her head on his shoulder. "You did change. You're still changing." "We're changing together," Marcus corrected, "building something real instead of just building something big." As darkness fell over Riverside, lights began turning on in the Crawford Family Resource Center, a beacon for families who needed help, who needed hope, who needed someone to show up when it mattered most. Inside, Marcus Sterling had finally found what he'd been searching for all along: not success but significance, not wealth but worth. He'd learned the hardest way possible that you can't buy back a missed moment, can't negotiate a second chance at being present, can't merge your way into meaning. But if you're fortunate enough to survive your own failures, you can choose differently. You can answer the call, you can be there, and in the end, that's the only empire worth building. One moment, one choice, one present, purposeful day at a time.